Hello, this video is in our Great Engine Game series. I'm Grandmaster Matthew Sadler, and today we're going to have a look at Stoofvlees against SlowChess from the TCEC Swiss 2. Stoofvlees, as many of you may know, is a very mercurial engine, but here it plays an absolutely masterly King's Indian Makogonov system against SlowChess. And white 1d4 players, well, should definitely take note of how Stoofvlees did it. It was absolutely fantastic. But black players, you haven't been ignored, because I ran a match between Stockfish and Leela, and they found some amazing ideas for black in this line as well. So I think both white and black players have got a lot to learn from this video. So let's dive into it then. So c4, knight f6, knight c3, g6. This is all the TCEC book. H3 is the the basic move for the Makogonov system. Makogonov, very strong Russian player of the 1940s, maybe according to historical projections, probably about third or fourth in the world at the time, and came up with a lot of very interesting systems. Bishop e3, e5, d5, knight c5, and knight d2. And, well, this TCC book exit is somewhat unfavourable for black, because white's actually on the verge of achieving two positional goals, and, well, black can only stop one of them. One of the goals is to play the move b2 to b4, chasing the knight away, and expanding on the queen side with gain of tempo. White's plan, obviously, is to play c5. The other one is slightly less obvious, and that's to play a move like bishop e2, which prevents black from playing knight h5 and getting the knight active, ready to advance into f4. And when you play the bishop to e2, this setup for white with bishop on e3, bishop on e2, knight d2 is quite ideal for white in the King's Indian. The bishop on e2 prevents knight h5. The bishop on e3 will support a later b4 and c5, and then from d2 the knight protects e4, and it's also ready to come into c4 to attack the white queen side. So yeah, I mean, this sort of setup is something you definitely aim for with white. I mean, the only drawback to it is that white's had to play the move h3 to achieve it. There are some systems with white where you try and achieve that even without the move h3, but still, the move h3 is reasonably useful, supports g4. You might lose a tempo later when you want to go h4 to h5, as in the game. But yeah, if you achieve your ideal piece structure, that's worth something. Now, yeah, I mean, we've got a choice. I mean, SlowChess here played a5, which is very reasonable. I have to say that Stockfish and Leela were looking mainly at playing the move knight e8 and just giving white that queenside play and really going for the kingside play. And well, there's one idea that Leela played that well, definitely worth looking, definitely worth seeing. It's h5, h4, h5 played, b4, knight d7, knight b3, and then this amazing idea, f5 takes and takes. Simply leaving the h5 pawn on prise, and black's idea simply is that well, white can take the pawn. That gets black a couple of tempi, and also the fact that that black has been given these central mobile pawns, that compensates for the loss of a pawn. It's an amazing idea. I mention it here straight away because you're going to see so many places in which both Leela and Stockfish in the King's Indian, they're so careless with the kingside pawns, happy to give them away just in order to get activity. And well, I mean, that's archetypal King's Indian play, but I mean, it was well, it's it was always beyond engines before, but here they're just playing the King's Indian just like Kasparov on steroids. Really, it's really amazing. But anyway, SlowChess played a5, a bit more solid, but perfectly reasonable. Bishop e2 played. You're always going to be playing bishop e2, and then g4, h4, and then g5 and h5. So it doesn't matter too much in which order you do it. But bishop e2's just a little bit more flexible. You could even choose to castle and then just play quietly with a3 and b4. Bishop d7, g4, a4, h4. Really typical stuff here. And now you have to decide what you're going to do. So SlowChess played the very natural knight e8, looking for f5. That's pretty decent. Stockfish against Leela played an incredible idea. Played the move, you might guess it, h5. So after h5, another h-pawn is being given away freely. We've got g takes h5, takes, bishop takes c5, otherwise after bishop takes h5 there'd be a little knight d3 check in there. Takes, bishop takes h5, bishop h6, bishop e2, a3, everything's flowing in, rook coming over for a rook lift. In we go, f5. Just, it's just really aggressive play, the sort of stuff you expect from the King's Indian, and Stockfish and Leela, they're just playing it superbly here, and another pawn sacrifice here. In we go, bishop g4, and there was superb counterplay for black, but amazing idea, this h5. It's sort of known in places, but I've never seen it quite as brazen as this, really. So a really nice idea there. So Slow Chess played knight e8, which is also quite reasonable, looking for f5. And now here we have a bit of a choice. Leela went with Stoofvlees' choice, which is h5. Just advancing the h-pawn, putting pressure on black's kingside structure. Very logical choice. Stockfish played g5, which is also quite interesting. Just, you're going to try and keep these pawns on h4 and g5, and they're pretty good, really. I mean, they stop the knight from coming to f6. They also render this bishop a little bit passive. You're just trying to keep control like that. There was a stunning game, actually, between Stockfish and Leela here. I'll just show it to you. C takes d5 really shocked me. I mean, normally you never take on d5 with black if you're if white can just recapture with a knight. And Leela carries on with just knight c7, giving away its dark squared bishop. I mean, this is doesn't look at all like a proper King's Indian strategy. And after h5, Leela's idea was extraordinary as well. So not even taking back on g6. Again, this very typical idea of from both Stockfish and Leela, just willing to give up their entire kingside pawn cover just for activity, and use white's pawns, in fact, as the shield. And this was just really sharp play. And it carried on. Rook h2, a3, rook g8, queen f1, which looks rather awkward. Bishop f7, giving the king some room there to escape. Queen g2 check, knight f1, queen takes e2, rook h8, and this was what Leela was aiming for, in actual fact. Just a position with rook and piece for the queen, but white's structure gets so wrecked that the black manages to create a fortress and a draw. And the game goes on and on, but Leela managed to draw all of these without too much difficulty. So it just looks like fantastic judgment from Leela. But again, just really, those are really non-standard things. But again, this idea of just giving away the kingside and going for counterplay, just super active play, both from Leela and Stockfish there. H5 I guess less sharp, you could say. It's really trying to exert a grip on black's position. And now both Stockfish and Leela went with Slow's choice, which was bishop f6. Knight f1, bishop g5, so exchanging off the dark squared bishops. Always a slightly difficult one, this one. Is that good for black or for white? You might say, it's a bad dark squared bishop, this one, behind a pawn chain, so exchange it. On the other hand, this dark squared bishop, that's the piece that becomes incredibly active all of a sudden when you get to play f5 and open up the center. So, by exchanging it, you're actually losing that latent dynamism. But you're, on the other hand, you're getting rid of something that could turn out badly as well. A passive dark squared bishop. So it's swings and roundabouts. It's just a decision that you make at the time. Here, Leela and Stockfish deciding that it's a good idea. But after Queen d2, there's a very interesting moment here. First crucial moment, which is the black played the move h6. Now, I mean, these moves are quite typical. Black's seeking to realise exchanges on its own terms rather than just exchange on e3 immediately. However, what happens in the game here, I'll just show you the position like this. Takes, HG, takes. I mean, this is quite risky strategically for black. The problem is that with these double G pawns, this front G pawn is always a target. As long as white's got a knight on the board, white can attack it with knight h3, and black needs something to defend with it. And that's probably going to mean that the king will have to stay within touch of f6 in order to defend it. And I think, if you think about that, that really gives white an opportunity to stretch black's defences, because we can, hit a pawn on g5 and then drag some black defensive pieces over, and then afterwards, do something on the queen side, for example, with a b2 to b4 break. And I think, whenever there's a factor like that in the position, there's always a certain amount of strategical risk for the defender. And this is actually what you see happening more and more towards the game as Stoofvlees' advantages accrue. The fact that you have to always have to look out to defend that g5 pawn, that becomes more and more painful. So, I think it's a very committal strategical decision, and probably not a good one. Certainly, Stockfish and Leela don't do any of that at all. They all want to take on e3. This is quite an interesting moment. Queen takes e3 in general was the move that my engines wanted to play. And many interesting different ideas played against it, but I think the most stunning was this one from Stockfish. So f5. Again, here we are. Take my kingside pawns, no worries. Knight g3, knight g7, castles, rook f4. The pawn on h7, it's the black king's very safe behind it, and of course, the fact that these kingside pawns are being cleared, that gives black an awful lot of squares here. But what Stockfish does with it is incredible. b3, rook f8, lining up on f2. King c2, knight a6, looking to come in with knight b4, so queen c1 from Leela, trying to win this a3 pawn. And then this amazing move, knight f5, really incredible. And what I love about it is that it's just play on both sides. We've had a4 to a3, knight to a6, and now we've got knight f5 on the king side. Takes, king d1, knight b4, in we go. Rook h1, bishop c2 check, bishop g6, we're looking for knight c2. Knight h5 thrown in to remove an attacking piece there. Rook d4, allowing queen f2. Rook h2, g3, throw it in, try and open up the g file, the f file rather, and cut the king off. Rook g2, rook h4, it's just all happening. Rook h1 check, how about that? Rook takes h1, queen g5. King d2, takes, queen f4 check. We drag the king out to d2, now we're coming out to check it. And then an amazing move, knight e3 check. So many pins, knight on d1 is pinned, pawn on f2 is pinned. Incredible this really. Knight takes g2, but of course it ends up, it's an engine game, ends up as a draw here. Just because, white's got some material advantage, and in principle some threats against the black king if black's careless, but black's got masses of ideas as well, of course. Even this pawn on a2 with the pawn on a3 here, if white spends too much time, then black can just take that and then queen the pawn. But Leela went for the counter-attack, and we ended up with a draw by repetition. But again, you just see Stockfish and Leela producing an amazing game there, and but I think what you're also seeing, with all those things that we look at in the opening, you're seeing that both Stockfish and Leela, compared to a very strong engine like Slow, but just really just showing some better understanding somehow of what's required from the opening, and how actively you need to play in order to get the maximum out of it. Whereas I think Slow's play is a lot more static really, I think in this match you have to say that at this early stage, you let Stockfish and Leela hammer it out against each other, it's parity. They both find fantastic resources for white and black, quite different ones at times, but basically all in the right spirit about what you need to do. So that's quite interesting. However, Queen e3 bishop e3, queen e3 was a major move, but knight e3 is also an alternative. And funnily enough, this was one that Stockfish scored very highly with. I haven't yet finished running all my engine matches. I'm still running some against Komodo and also against Stoofvlees as well. But actually this position is one that Stockfish is scoring very highly in, and also against Leela as well. Simply this type of position, knight f6, rook h1, king g7. There's a nice little trap here that if you go rook h6, I've got knight h5 to trap the rook. But just king c2, knight d1, queen a5, you know, all this sort of shuffling in this type of position. Yeah, Stockfish just seems to be scoring enormously with this. I don't think it's such a fantastic position for white, but you know, a slight advantage. But I wouldn't have thought it would be so much. But obviously, I think, you know, yeah, there's it's not trivial either. It seems, you know, there are some chances for white here. So that's, you know, quite interesting. Just strange sometimes, you know, how some positions that you don't think are, you know, particularly amazing, they just seem to score highly for one engine. But back to the game. We after queen d2 we got h6, and Stouf exchanged off the queens like this, and we get this position. So how should you actually defend this? Well, it's a good question for black. I mean, what are the parameters of the position? Well, why is white better? Maybe is the first thing we should start with. Well, as mentioned, we've got this pawn on g5, which is a long-term target. And we've also got a b4 break on the queen side, you know, b4 and then c5 afterwards. And black doesn't really have the same sort of thing. I mean, c6, yeah, I mean, that's only really, in general, that's, you know, that can only be a kind of a weakness, really. You're not going to be able to follow up with b5. So there's nothing really much for black to do. And then at the same stage, you've got to watch out a little bit for the open H file, which white might use at the moment. So yeah, I mean, it's really a question of you know, long-term prospects for black, long-term chances to change the nature of the position. Much better for white than for black. Now, the interesting thing is that in you know, lots of games against Leela, from these types of positions, you know, I just take lots of positions from the various stages of the game and just put them into Leela and Stockfish and let them run a match with that. I mean, Stockfish managed to defend everything. It didn't lose a single game against Leela, which is frankly astonishing. But what Stockfish was doing was very simple in actual fact. It was just keeping its rooks over on the queen side, really anticipating that b4 break, defending against the h file with minimal resources, keeping its knight there so that if a knight comes to h3, I can just go knight h7 to defend the g5 pawn. And it was playing the move c6 just to keep white honest there, with the idea of capturing on c6 with a pawn if ever white plays d takes c6. Yeah, I mean, and basically after that, black was just sitting in this position, and that seemed to be enough to hold a draw without, you know, not too many problems. So again, summarize: keep the rooks on the queen side, anticipating the b4 break, hold the g5 pawn and h file invasion with minimal resources, essentially king and knight. And play c6 just to keep white honest, you know, to give yourself a chance to change the pawn structure if necessary. And after dc6, take with the b pawn. That seemed to be a good basic defensive structure. Now, what Slow did was not as good in actual fact. Yeah, I mean, Leela really, you know, also went from this position went a little bit wrong at times, and Stockfish was winning a number of games against Leela here. But we'll have a look. So f3, king f7, knight d1. Stouf just manoeuvring there. This f2 square's a very nice square for the knight. It can come around to h3 or to d3 to try and remove that knight. I mean, there's no immediate rush to do anything. And certainly at the start, as you can see, Stouf doing a good job keeping its king and keeping its rooks rather in the area of the queen side. Knight d7, knight b6, also a pretty good idea. Stockfish also did this from time to time. Just got to watch out a little bit for this pawn on h6 now. Pawn on g5 rather. I mean, knight h3 will have to be defended now with king f6. Feels a little bit risky, but will probably be okay. Knight cd1 and rook h8. But this is where it all starts going a bit wrong for slow chess, because slow chess gets very tempted to move the rook to h2. And it looks active, and it does cause some annoyance for white. But on the other hand, it just means that b4 is easier to achieve for white. And once you achieve b4, well, I mean, the invasion possibilities are much bigger. You've got just less firepower in there with black. I think black was expecting that white was going to be forced to exchange off both, the second set of rooks, after which that's generally helping black. Black manages to defend quite okay with both sets of rooks off. But yeah, Stouf simply left the rook hanging there and went about his business. And well, this turned out to be very awkward. So knight d3 takes, and now a very serious mistake from Slow, which pushes it further into trouble. And this is again a moment where you have a whole period now where you need to take some very good decisions about pawn structure, and Leela is right on there, and so is Stockfish, and that's just a very impressive part of it. So c6, c5 is also possible, but c6 is a key move here, and it's really based on a very subtle appreciation of the pawn structure. If white goes b4 in this position, to look for c5, what you do with black, you take off, and you play c5, and block the queen side in this way. If after c6, if white takes on c6, b takes c6 and b4, well, this whole queen side's got a lot more loosened. So there you don't take the b4 pawn en passant. You leave it like that and leave the a file closed, and then bring the king over to here, king over to e7, bishop e6, and in principle, black was managing to hold this. The big problem with king f6 is that if you go, it's not any move, it's the main move. If you go b4 here with white, and black plays the same idea, a takes b3, a takes b3, c5, then white plays d takes c6. And this is not at all what black wants. B takes a6, b takes c6 rather. Well, the queen side's very loose. We just start coming in with these moves, and black's in big trouble. Bishop c6, not really that attractive. I'm just going to play b4 and b5, chase away the bishop, attack the pawn on b7. So yeah, I mean, essentially this move king f6, it doesn't give black the opportunity to get the ideal structure on the queen side because of this, because of the en passant rule here. So that's why you need to play a move like c6, just to have the possibility to meet b4 with takes and c5 without allowing en passant, and just make sure there that you've got the ideal queenside pawn structure. And a move like rook a7, I just go bishop c8 to defend the pawn on b7. I mean, it's quite subtle. I mean, when you look at Leela's games against Stockfish, and you ooh, what's happened there? I wonder. And you hear the you see the games, then you understand what the idea was, but it's quite subtle. So king f6 played, and now we get in b4, and as we mentioned before, black can't go for the ideal structure on the queen side. And that means that white's going to have very good opportunities to achieve c5. And well, when you play b4 and black doesn't play ab, yeah, this pawn on a4 starts to become a weakness as well. And what you've actually ended up with white is the possibility to attack the weakness on g5 and also the weakness on a4 on both sides of the board. So black's going to be very, very stretched indeed. So after b4, Slow played king e7, rook c1, king d8, rook c2, bishop e8, knight f1, Stouf just manoeuvring beautifully with the knight, and really every time just ignoring this rook on h2, really not bothering about it at all. King e3. Now the king's actually thinking about coming back to g2 to support a knight coming to h3 afterwards. That's the idea. c5 played from Slow, and then a3. And I mean, yeah, what is this position? In fact, you know, a3 was not the move that Stockfish and Leela played. They were both looking at d takes c6 here. Yeah, Leela was not managing to beat Stockfish from this. Stockfish was managing to beat Leela from this. I don't actually think it's the best move, d takes c6. I think that what Stouf did with a3, yeah, as far as I can tell from my test, I can't see a way for black to defend long term. The key point is really that white's got obviously this possibility of bringing a knight to h3 to attack the pawn. B takes c5 is going to be a threat, causing weak pawns on c5 and e5. We've got rook b2 attacking this knight on b6 and the pawn on b7 behind it. And we've also got the a4 pawn, which is extremely weak. And yeah, I mean, I tried yeah, quite a few tests. I also played against Leela myself with this, and yeah, I just felt that it wasn't. It was just too awkward to defend, really. You know, obviously, Stockfish does a much better job than me, but still, it was quite funny. Against Leela 1 node from this position, I managed to win it as black. Against 10 node, it was just a draw, but against 100 nodes, I was losing, which kind of sort of unofficially confirms one of the Leela devs called Viren, one of his well, theories, calculations, that basically Leela at 100 nodes should be much stronger than me. That seemed to be pretty much borne out by the evidence there. So what was I actually trying in this position? I mean, what I was trying in this position was to hold simply. I wanted to play king c7, knight d2, rook h1, bishop f1, rook h2, rook c1, knight c8. And what I really wanted to do was to wait with my king and knight. King defends the b pawn. If you take on c5, I want to have the possibility of going to d6. And I'm just going to have my rook active on here, trying to cause some confusion. Yeah, by now there's no point in having the rook over on the queen side, because something will invade on the king side afterwards. We're just committed to this now. King on the queen side, rook is then on the h file. And yeah, I mean, Leela 10 node just ended up repeating moves at some stage. It couldn't get much further. As you can see, knight d3, knight d7, rook b1, king e3. Bit of a shame I have to break my my ideal defensive structure. Rook b5 played, bishop d1, and Leela 1 node going for it. But it's a little bit risky. I get this move, which I've been looking for ages, b5, and it's a little bit annoying. If c takes b5, I go c4. And after rook b5, I've got this move, knight b6, rook c5, king d6. And I'm afraid that the rook on c5 is trapped here, can't move, and I've just got rook d3, picking up the piece. So that's how I beat Leela 1 node. Yeah, just always tactics with Leela 1 node. So I mean, that's quite that was quite interesting, you know, to do the upgrade all the time. So you try 1 node, you try 10 node, and then you try a bit higher, and you see what happens. But I wasn't able to hold these positions against Leela at 100 nodes. So that's, you know, one possible plan. What slow chess tried was to play knight d7, king f2, bishop f7. So it's just trying to make sure it takes on c5 with the knight afterwards. That's the defense. Not bad at all. I mean, it's more natural than what I did. It sort of keeps the structure together. But it's actually kind of tough to do this. I said, like, I'm always amazed at how, Stouf just allows this rook to enter in here, no worries, no problems at all. Rook c1, rook h2 check, king f1, rook b1, targeting the pawn on b7, rook h8, king g2, finally deciding, okay, we'll stop the rook coming in, and also protecting the h3 square. So knight f2, round to h3 is a definite idea here. Bishop f7, yeah, and now, there are various ways of doing it. I mean, Stockfish played knight f2, knight h3, c takes b4, rook takes b4 played, attacking the a4 pawn, king f6, bishop d1, knight c5, rook b6, rook d8, king f2, and this is just really difficult for black. I mean, everything's attacked: b7, d6, a4, g5, and what black eventually decided here, this was Leela then in my engine games, was that you had to give up the g5 pawn, because if you go bishop f7, I just go king e3, knight f2, and knight d3, and everything collapses. The b7 pawn is going. I just threatening knight takes c5, and then a4 is also very weak as well. It's just total carnage basically. So from that point of view, in my game, Leela played king e7, knight takes g5 was played, and white just broke through with f4 and won the game. It's those sort of things that make you think, I don't think this is defensible in the long term. I think this is probably a losing structure, which means that a3 from Stoofvlees was a superb decision. Well, Stoofvlees played knight c3, and now, Stockfish still managed to defend this, but I think this was more kind of due to a weird miracle than anything else. Because I think that in the long term, as we showed, it's lost already. But I'll just show you what Stockfish came up with. It was rook c8, bishop d1, and here Leela played knight takes a4. Now, I mean, if you look at what Stockfish did against Leela, it played the knight round to h3, attacked the pawn, and then swapped off the knights with knight d3, and that was enough to win. Leela sort of grabbed the a4 pawn, which looks very strong, but black gets some unexpected counterplay here with b6, rook a3, and then this position. And this position proves to be rather hard to win for black. But the funny thing is that Stockfish gives it +3 for white, so it's kind of very pessimistic about this. But actually, Leela didn't manage to win it. I think there's a very good reason for this. Certainly Leela 100 nodes managed to defend it against me without any problem at all. The big problem about it is that, let's move on to a few moves down, this position, bishop e8. The big problem is that if you can't actually win any of these pawns. I mean, if I go rook e6, then we get this familiar idea, king f6. When the rook is trapped, so I can't actually win that pawn. And if I go rook d8, king e7, rook here, then I'm met by bishop d7 with a very similar trick, rook takes c5, king d6. So actually the black pawns are quite safe. Now the only plan I came up with that might have been positive was actually something like this. Let me just zoom forward to a position. So what I've done here, I've got my king to the side, I've managed to chase the rook back, and then what I actually did was just play this idea with playing the rook to a3, just to get control of the a file. And the key point is that this ending is actually completely winning here. d6, d7, king b5, and I pick up the c5 pawn, and I win. So I had against, I think it was Leela 10 node that I did this against. I mean, this is just actually winning. The problem is that you never manage ever to do this, because with the sort of the skillful use of checks, Leela always managed against me to get into a position where it could counterattack the f3 pawn and also win it with tempo. I'll just show you one of the playouts here that we did. Bishop d3, rook a2 check, keep on checking me, then attack the bishop, keep on checking. I go to b3, because if I go to c3, you'll just go rook a3 check. And now we go rook f2, and I'm taking this one with tempo. And then here, I go bishop takes g4, and then I'm threatening bishop e2 with tempo. I mean, if I could get my c and d pawns rolling, I'd be great, but I have to waste some more time, and then the g4 pawn comes along, and yeah, was just completely equal, perfectly fine counterplay for black. And in the game that between Leela and Stockfish here, then there was an absolutely gorgeous moment here. Rook b1, rook f1, rook b7, king f6. What is this? Well, the simple idea is that after rook d7, it's actually stalemate here. So you can just do your little rook with I'm not quite sure how do you want to start. Rook f2 check probably, and just give up your rook c2, and then when you take it, it's going to be stalemate. So there's even that in the position. So yeah, incredible. But I think that's a little bit of a freakish little bit of luck there. Of course, Stockfish found it, but Stockfish was saying +3 in this position as well. So it hadn't foreseen all of the ideas, I think. But okay, I think in principle this position is lost. And well, what slow chess did was it gave up the a4 pawn. But yeah, I mean, after the a4 pawn is gone, we've got the h-file, and we've also got the g5 pawn as well. And this is how it always goes with these. When you make these strategically risky choices with black here in this case, at an early stage, they often come back to haunt you, and here they certainly did, because Stove just won very easily. Very calm, quiet play. That bishop on g8 is completely useless. AB, bishop e8, bishop g6, and it was just finished. So there we are, bit of a long video. I do apologise for that, but I think it is an absolutely stunning game there. I think what the engines were discovering in the opening, that's really if you're a King's Indian player, remember this, because this is the way that you're supposed to be playing the opening. I think there's a very big strategical lesson with h6, and the idea of accepting these sort of weaknesses and what they can mean in the end game. And I think the point is, maybe in a human game, this game might have been drawn, and you might have said, "Oh, okay, good idea, this h6." But you get an engine like Stoofvlees, which is so good positionally, demonstrating how to do this, and you see how black has to suffer. And I think it's very, very telling that engines like Stockfish and Leela don't even go near this. They avoid this. They understand that the long-term prospects that black has are very poor. And yeah, I mean, plenty of moments I've found incredibly instructive, like at this case, the need to play c6 and why that is, and it's just subtle appreciation of the queenside structure that you need to defend, against white's attack, also very instructive. And the fact that this h-file, turned out to be pretty useless, and it was much better for black to defend by, by anticipating the real dangerous area where things was going to happen. Lots and lots of interesting stuff there. I learned a lot from it, and well, I'm still playing more engine matches, but at the moment. But the basic trend there is the same as with the Leela match, that the Stockfish manages to defend more or less everything with black, and wins a very large number of games with white. So quite amazing from that point of view as well. I hadn't expected it to be that clear. But okay, I hope you enjoyed that video. If you enjoyed it, then do think about giving me a like, and maybe subscribing to the channel, and even having a look at the Silicon Road to Chess Improvement, which is full of stuff like this, of content like this. So if you enjoyed it, then I'm pretty sure you'll enjoy the book as well. And well, otherwise, thanks very much for watching, and see you in the next video.